Welcome to Suicide Undone. Today we are addressing the subject of workplace toxicity. It's a subject that impacts a lot of people in various degrees. I know it certainly impacted me, having worked at Rikers Island for 5 years. Our guest today is Amy Pons. She was subjected to a lot of workplace toxicity, which culminated in a suicide attempt. So, Amy, I want to thank you very much for being here to share your story. And please tell us about your experience.
Sure. Hi, everyone. And I want to preface this with, unfortunately, my entire career of almost 20 years, I have run into not only toxicity, but I would say mental abuse in the workplace, which I know we're going to get into deeper a little bit later on, but I'll talk about a lot of the ways that I'm helping support that in my new chapter here. So I, by and large, have been in corporate environments for almost 20 years, but there was a time for about 7 months in which I was at a local nonprofit. And when I say local, it was just a very kind of regional, small nonprofit. And this was in 2009, 2010. And what was interesting is because of my prior experience in corporate America, my supervisor, and this was a woman that was probably around 20 years older than me, 25 years older than me. And in theory, she wanted my experience and wanted me to be there to kind of run the day to day. I was in the position of director of marketing. But really in practice, once I got there, it became very evident to me that she was now looking back in my healthier viewpoint, she was very hurt and very insecure, and she had a lot of things that she was working on herself. So for me to come in and start running things like I was asked to do, it became extremely challenging for her. And on a daily basis for about 7 months straight, I was repeatedly told I was worthless and that I had no business being here in any capacity. She was really kind of tearing and prodding at the lack of self-worth and self-value that I had as a child, as in terms of different areas of trauma. She tapped back into that by telling me every day that I was worthless and that I didn't deserve to be here. So after 7 months, I decided she was right. And unfortunately, I did attempt my life. But before that, I'll get into that more. But on a daily basis, the way that I was kind of coping with this verbal and mental abuse was that I was numbing a lot. So every night I would go home and I would drink 2 bottles of wine by myself. And I was also on a high dose of diet pills to kind of help me have energy, frankly, during the day and be able to navigate all of the other things about my job and I would really try to steer clear of her to try to figure how I was going to stay there long term. But one night after, it was a particularly bad week with her, I decided that during, I was drinking my two bottles of wine like I normally did. I was listening to music, and I got the idea that I might attempt to take my life. And I got really excited. It was an unusual feeling because I realized that was my only way out. It was the only way that I was going to find peace and happiness and kind of set my soul free. So logistically, what I did was I took a bottle of Tylenol PM, and that was that.
I'm so sorry that for all the stress. Was she singling you out, or were there other people that were being subjected to the same type of abusive dynamics?
She had been abusing the team when I got in there. So what was what was good for the team is when I came in, I was able to shield them from her. So they got kind of a reprieve, and it all came down on me.
Oh. Was the upper management aware of what was going on around that time?
They did, and they would often, because I mean, immediately when it started happening, I did go to different areas of management and HR to try to get some help. And the answer that I received was, yeah, she's tough. That's just her. Don't pay her any mind, those kinds of things. And only until the point where, so that night when I took all of those meds, I woke up a day and a half later, and I was so confused, and I thought I had gone, and I don't know what to call it other than my spirit team was not ready to let me go. Divine intervention. I woke up and I was really confused. I also woke up with this confusion, but also kind of astonishment that things had gotten to that point, and I don't want to say I had allowed it, because that suggests I did something wrong. It's more that I think a lot of times as women, we take on so much, and we have the mentality of, I'm just going to figure it out. I'm just going to plow through it. I'm just. And I had gotten to a point where, when I attempted my life and then I woke up, I couldn't believe I woke up. But then I also was like, wow, this individual does not deserve that much power over me. And I deserve so much better, because I know who I am in my heart and my soul. So only then, when I got to the point where, so I woke up, I decided I'm going to do something about this, like firmly do something. So I got a lawyer, and I had gotten together all of the information of the 7 months of I had taken a lot of notes. So any advice out there, if you are in a toxic work environment, take so many notes on times, dates, any witnesses, the context of what the person or the people are saying to you. That is critical, especially when you go to take any sort of action. So when I did that, and I had kind of like, I think I had, I don't know, 30 pages of documentation of things that had happened, to the point where she had physically kind of come toward me, toward the end. I turned all of that into the CEO and HR. And fortunately for me, once they realized, and again, they're a nonprofit, I didn't want to get rich. I wanted to be financially okay while I healed. And there's not a lot of options. And we'll talk through kind of a more recent mental abuse situation, but there's not a lot you can do. And luckily for me, in that time, they ruled in my favor, and I was able to get a small settlement, not a ton, but just enough for me to be able to take a step back, heal from what had just happened, and do a lot of work on myself, and just heal and rest.
What types of things did you realize in terms of possible unhealed childhood wounds that you had? Was there a connection there?
Yeah, so I would say that specifically from that standpoint, my parents, and they're very different people now. I feel, not justifying kind of early on, but they were extremely young when they had me, and they were not able to mentally, emotionally, or physically attune to me as a child. So what that looked like was that I just knew that they were in charge. And so that manifested into any kind of supervisor or boss in my future. What they said was truth. And so when my boss started telling me I was worthless, that's what I was calling on from that earlier time that said, oh, she's in charge, so she has to be right.
Mhm. So eventually you took action. Was that in conjunction with a lawyer when
Yes.
you got the settlement? Okay. Yeah, there. It's really remarkable the type of dynamics that go on, and sometimes it's very subtle, and sometimes it's very overtly abusive. But I certainly agree with your approach that that timeline and that documentation is so critical. In some cases, and who knows what the motivation is, but obviously she, as you said, was a very insecure woman who had a need to put you down. But sometimes it's personality style, person, I get a lot of EAP referrals of employees, and sometimes it's one individual, and other times it's a whole corporate culture that's
Right.
just very toxic. And how I think of it is the health of the organization can be seen along the lines of a continuum from healthy to extremely dysfunctional. And it's not always that the upper management recognizes what's going on, right? And sometimes even a complaint is made, but there's like a blind eye turned because they don't know what to do, or they fear retaliation from the person who is doing the abuse. There are U.S. federal laws that prohibit individuals from certain types of harassment. For example, harassment based on sex, sexual orientation, race, religion, national origin, familial status, disability status. All those are illegal and very clear cut that they can be legal action taken. In some cases, it's not so clear cut, right? If you have just a boss that just has an issue, just doesn't like you for whatever reason, and that could be so much harder to navigate.
And that's exactly what is happening. What I'm seeing, and I didn't fully tell everyone what I did. So, my name is Amy Pons, and I am founder and CEO of Unlock the Magic, and I'm a master certified life coach. What I do current day is I help women to take the next best step for them, and to get away or to navigate an environment that no longer serves them, and even worse, maybe harming them. That's really where I'm at today. And what I share all of that because the most recent experience that I've had over the past decade is in a Fortune 200 corporation where exactly that, the latter part of what you talked about, is happening, where it's not overt, it's not anything toward any protected classes, it's not any of that. What it is, it's more of the mental abuse, like gaslighting. It is creating and fostering culture that are turning team members against each other, kind of encouraging everyone out for themselves, making fun of each other. So tearing each other down if someone is trying to be positive or trying to be really kind of have a nice team morale, that's made fun of and put down. So all of those things that are happening, and that's in 2022, I had walked into a part of the organization where that was happening every single day. And once again, I was in a place where I was protecting my team, but I was on the front lines of that mental abuse. And so I did not have as strongly of the feelings that I had a decade prior as it relates to not having self-worth, self-value. It's something that I've worked really hard on since my suicide attempt. And what happened this time in 2022, I started to get the familiar feelings, though, that there's something happening that is making me feel less than. And so what I did is I stood up and I said, I unsubscribe to this. I'm saving my own life. And I said, today's my last day. This had been happening for 10 months this time. from a boss, but also not just that boss. It was like all senior leaders. They were all in the business of tearing you down, is the best way that I can put it. And the gaslighting, it didn't, I know that's become kind of a buzzword, but what that looks like is that things were happening, like I would be hearing things in a meeting, and then I would go to follow up on those, and a leader would say, oh, that never happened. So it was really kind of dangerous in the way that the mental abuse that's happening today, it may not be about sex, gender. It may not be like some of the things that are, to your point, legally protected, but that's why it's such a rampant problem today, is because there is no legal protection toward mental abuse in the workplace. There's just none. If it's happening on more of like a subtle way, because what happened in my case was over 4 to 5 months, I was being groomed. I was being told I was amazing. Everything that I was doing was perfect. And then a switch was flipped. And then it became, I was in a place where I was kind of a sponge from that feedback. And I would say from kind of last year, July to October, I was in depths of hell because I did not know what was true, what was false, where I was heading on a daily basis. It was like reality was kind of questioned. So that's what's happening in current day. And again, I can't stress this enough. Not only is there no protection against it, unfortunately, and again, I've seen this in my experience, when you ladder this up to HR organizations at corporate, in larger organizations, they will very quickly, they're not in it to protect you, they're in it to protect the company. So unfortunately, the answer is, and I'm glad EAP exists, don't get me wrong, it's not enough. In these situations where an employee has no choices but to either stay in the toxic and mental abusive situation or simply just leave. There's no options.
I saw this play out with the case that I had. It was a referral. And the woman, I obviously can't mention names, but she was a high-profile media personality. Really, I would say about her, she was at the top of her game. Not just attractive, but she had just this grace and eloquence about her. And the company decided that they did not want to award her a renewal of the contract. But yet they brought in a younger woman with definitely less experience. And this got played out where she was almost being groomed to be her replacement, but they were silent about it. So the type of mental distress that she went through was really, it was inexcusable that they did that for her. And she'd been with the particular organization for many years.
They push you, they treat you in a way so that the kind of the problem, which they think is you, just takes care of itself. You just move on. And that's the way that they do it, so that they don't have to spend any money to pay you out or severance you. They're also, it comes from the top. This is my opinion. It comes from the very top. To your point about turning a blind eye, if a team, a specific leader that is known to be toxic, first of all, they breed toxicity. So any leader you have high up, they're going to breed more of what they know and feel comfortable with. They're not going to bring in someone that's really healthy and amazing for the organization. They're just going to keep producing and crunching numbers. As long as those numbers stay at a certain point, literally no C-suite member is going to pay attention to that. They're not going to care. There is a systemic problem right now that high-level leaders do not care how the work gets done, just that the work gets done, period. They don't care.
And you can imagine my distress where I dialed, we were doing a remote session, and I was expecting to find her, and instead I got her husband. He told me that the poor woman had suffered a breakdown and was in the hospital. I was really so shocked. And around the same time, I was dealing with another woman in very similar circumstances. And I was seeing her level of distress was escalating to the point where it could have very clearly headed for a breakdown. And at that time, I advised her to just go on FMLA, which she did. And ultimately, I think that saved her mental sanity. But there are different, again, levels of health in an organization, different philosophies. Now, I remember ages ago when I studied business, there was the theory X and theory Y style of management, which kind of, it's really based on the assumptions that an organization makes about a person. So theory X is based on negative assumptions regarding the typical worker, and that style of management basically assumes that people have little ambition, they avoid responsibility, that they're individually goal-oriented, and generally the managers believe the employees are less intelligent, lazier, work solely for sustainable income, and that that employees are working just for their own self-interest. This contrasts with theory Y, right, which is based on positive assumptions that employees are internally motivated, enjoy their job, work to better themselves without a direct return. A direct reward in return. And I think the philosophy of the upper management definitely trickles down and affects the whole organization. And once this is set, it is really so hard to change. Once of course, everything is based on the bottom line, which is productivity. But when you have an unhealthy work environment, what does that do to profit, right? When you have a high turnover, or even if you have employees that wind up in the psychiatric hospital, that can't be good for the bottom line at all. And sometimes it's a very simplistic, I mean, they will hire consultants to come in and help them, but sometimes it's a wreck. I mean, I could tell you, I was working in a nursing home, and this consultant had the brilliant idea. He was going to come in and give us buttons that said BMG with a line through it, right? So BMG stood for no bitching, moaning, or groaning. We're not supposed to complain, and that was a solution to everything, right? If we stop complaining, then everything would automatically get better. And it's just incredible, right? Because nothing changed, obviously. If anything, we kind of made a joke out of it, and we created our own, we called it the BMG Lounge, where the employees would get together every so often to do just that, bitch, moan, and groan. And that was our way of just making fun of it.
It's almost like he achieved his goal by bringing you together by something that, you know, was made fun
in the intended way. Exactly.
I felt my blood rising earlier when you were talking about the two ways of leaders thinking about people. So I think there's also this, and again, this is speaking from personal experience. There's this element of thought, especially post-pandemic. Well, let's go back in time a little bit. Pre-pandemic, it was actually kind of beautiful the way that human beings were coming together and saying, okay, how are we going to do this? How are we going to manage everyone being on lockdown, being from home? How do we do this? Like, it was kind of a beautiful moment where humans were coming together to figure it out. Then what you had over the next 2 years during lockdown is you had human beings from, you know, entry level all the way up to C-suite. Everybody kind of designed their lives to work the most optimally for themselves. And specifically across many industries, they had the most productive years in history over COVID. So productivity was not a question. Let's bring us now out of COVID. We all started going back. productivity wasn't a challenge, was never in a question. And what you see now is a lot of leaders saying they're using the guise of togetherness and team morale and being together is the way to go, and completely dismissing the fact that so many people had finally gotten their kind of their balance during COVID, because they were able to do those things that took exponentially amount of like a lot of time at night after they had to commute home. They dismissed that, again, under the guise of being together. Now you have what you're looking at now is you have people that are back. They're not getting, and that burnout is starting to ramp up like wildfire, because now all the things that they were kind of fitting into their day while they're working from home, they now have to fit in on those nights or the weekends, before work, whatever that looks like. And you're, unfortunately, and this is my prediction, the rest of 23 is going to look really, really not good for the workplace and people burning out and trying to figure it out. I think further, if companies were actually being honest about why they wanted people to come back, you might get some more buy-in. And that some of those truths are, you have these sprawling campuses for corporations. And if people wanted to work remotely more than they wanted to come on site, what are they going to do with those buildings? Second of all, if people wanted to work anywhere in the world, taxes become an issue. It all comes back to money. So thinking about, I feel like there's this huge disconnect of like, we're all in this together at the beginning of COVID. Let's all figure it out together. There was kind of this human-centric, human-led approach to the way work was happening. And then it was like, again, a switch flipped. And all of these leaders were kind of like putting on a facade for 2 years. And now they're like, all right, come back. And it wasn't up for discussion. No surveying. It was just like, come back. It was just like no one was listening to what was happening. And that's where you're seeing it play out right now. A lot of companies required everyone to come back in March. So I think the reason I'm sharing all this is because the term of the idea of mental abuse is continuing to evolve and shift and change. And one of the ways there's mental abuse in current day is that leaders just aren't listening to what the more junior level roles are trying to tell them and what's best for them.
Yeah, I saw that get played out directly in a correctional facility. I was had gotten this assignment. There had been a suicide of a high-ranking official, and I was supposed to go and do a debriefing for the employees.
Wow.
And this was quite large, and I got to meet with a lot of the staff, from janitorial to physician, across the board. And what I kept hearing repeatedly, it wasn't about their feelings about what had occurred, but their feelings about how they were being treated as employees.
Yeah.
And it was unanimous across the board that it was toxic, it was mentally abusive, it was just degrading to work there. And unfortunately, the suicide occurred. Obviously, we can't go back and look to see what had happened that led to this very unfortunate event, but it doesn't take a lot to conclude that possibly this individual got to the point of just couldn't cope, where same as what you described at that moment in time.
Yeah, it's so many things put all together. And if we look at how much time we truly spend in the workplace, it's 8, 9, 10 hours a day. You spend the bulk of your life. If you spend the bulk of your life feeling degraded, what does that show up in your mental health? Like, what does that show up as in your personal life? When you go to maybe plant a garden on the weekend, do you feel good about that? No, because like what you're feeling is such distress, the fact that you have to go back to that environment on Monday, even though you're doing something now, which is, I pray and hope for all of you listening that your home is your safe space. If it's not, certainly there are a lot of resources for that. But what I had gotten to even last year, I couldn't even enjoy the things that I loved about my safe space at home, whether it be my partner, my dogs, my, cooking, doing the garden, doing some things outside. Nothing felt good because my inside, my turmoil, due to the fact that I was being told again, that I was worthless, that I did not deserve my job, etc., consistently every day, and then being told that what I thought was untrue. All of this leads to somewhere. It doesn't all have to happen at once. And I can't stress this enough. You get used to it. I see so many individuals that slough, like a leader will say something really negative or toxic in an open meeting. And I will ask later on, hey, do you think that was okay? And the employees are like, that's just them. Do you know how many times I hear that a day is that's just them?
It's gaslighting at its best, isn't it?
Well, and you're just excusing it, and you're also giving them a pass that they get to be harmful in that situation because that's just them and they're in charge. And back to what you were saying earlier about retaliation, if you try to do something about it, you become the problem.
Yeah, I wonder though, with post-pandemic options, a lot of people have gotten a taste of working from home and the flexibility that that affords. Literally, you could work from any place. It's a digital society now, right? I
Not
wonder
really.
Sorry?
Not really,
Mhm.
because a lot of the corporations are making you come back at least 3 days a week. So you can't go somewhere permanently anymore.
I wonder though if people are coming to the conclusion that there are other options, such as you have, in terms of self-employment or finding another avenue of
Yeah.
to contribute.
Yes. And that's exactly what I get excited about, as you can tell. As I've been a coach for a really long time, but I became certified this spring. Oh, it's always yes. And there's kind of, as well as I do, when it comes to coaching and therapy, like it's not up to what I want to do. It's up to what the client wants to do or needs, or patient needs. So oftentimes what I do is I help them figure out, I try to assess pretty early on, is this an emergency? Like, do I need to help you get out tomorrow? But do you have a life raft in place? Like, what are your non-negotiables? Is it money? Is it insurance? Like, there's always something that keeps them there, despite the fact that they're incurring mental abuse. And it's usually around some sort of monetary standpoint of some point. So what I try to do is I do one of three things right away. Is one, I help them either navigate the situation of, like, is there someone harmful in your day-to-day, and what can we do to make that limited, like that time with them limited? That's kind of the navigation, if it's not an emergency. Then number two, if it's, hey, listen, it's getting bad and I need to get out of this role, I then talk to them about, okay, do you want to stay at your current company? Because again, there's other options within the organization that you could kind of move through. And then we work toward that. And that's something specifically that a client of mine recently, we got her into a new place within the company. And then there's the third kind of, I call it the exit plan. Like, I got to go, like, now. And that is a more urgent approach to, is it today? Do we put a plan in place to get 2 more paychecks and then you leave? Like, what does that look like? What can you safely incur to not further your distress, but also start making actions? Because what I see, I have to say, Linda, the thing I will always see is, and again, I serve women, not to suggest that men don't suffer too, but that's my niche. A lot of times, again, women will just power through, or they'll just say, like, I'll just deal with it or handle it. And they don't have that trusted ally or a sounding board, whether it be a therapist, a coach, they don't have that person that's kind of helping them through the process. And it gets into a really dangerous situation like mine was. I wasn't talking to one soul about what was happening to me. So I would encourage everyone, talk to someone, and preferably someone who's trained on taking the next steps, like, of course, therapist, of course, but then also where I come in, I really help you take action quickly if that comes to the case. So I've talked for a long time, but again, what I wanted to say to you is like, it really, really is unfortunate because people just get used to it, and they give everyone passes because there's someone so senior. And by the way, those really senior people, I posted this recently on my LinkedIn, those really senior people that are harmful, they've learned to be that way. I choose to believe that all humans start out really good, really good intentions. They've learned it, and so now they're perpetuating it. And a big part of this is just kind of a continuous cycle. And what you see happening through the generations, if any of us have had a chance to work with Gen Z, love Gen Z. They don't give a flying F. They don't care what your agenda is. They do them. I'm so proud of them because I'm a millennial. I'm an older millennial. And what we did is we kind of play both sides, and we're polite, and we have this like, we're like, okay, whatever you say. And we just want, we want things to be peaceful. Gen Z is coming in. They're fucking shit up, and it's amazing. So
I guess those are not the types of clients you're getting, right?
I have talked to a few Gen Zs, and what I do, it's interesting you say that, because what I do help them do, some Gen Z, they're so unapologetic. Their peace is disrupted because they see all of the stuff happening around them that is broken. And so then they get really upset or mad, and then their peace is not able to thrive. So what I help them do is navigate through, okay, when someone says this is what they're talking about. So I do have some that I help kind of navigate the corporate experience, especially because they're like, what is this? What's happening? And I'm like, I know, I hear you. You're going to be part of the change. But some of this too is having to kind of, we want to change it. We do want to change it. But there's some parts that you can't just go in and kind of flip tables, because then no one's going to listen. No one's going to, it's hard to make any change when you come in with a forceful or, in some cases, really powerful agenda. So,
Yeah, I imagine that a lot of employees fall into that learned helplessness pattern, and your role is to empower them and to help them see that it doesn't have to be that way, and that the toll is just could be so enormous and so all encompassing. I know some of the things that I witnessed as an employee working at Rikers Island. You really made me question if this was not a third world society, right?
yeah.
To just allow continued victimization, not just of the inmates, but also of the employees.
Right.
And it was really, it at that moment in time, that stress that I was going through, again, it was all encompassing. Not something I like to admit, but during that phase of my life, I was stopped by a police officer on the Triborough Bridge because I had gotten a phone call, and against my better judgment, I reached for my phone. And he was going to issue me a ticket, and then he decided not to because I was so apologetic to him. And he came back and he said, "Okay, you could go." I just burst out crying, right? And he was looking at me with open eyes, like, "But Linda, I said you could go. Why are you crying?" And it was just that whole accumulation of the stress of seeing the workers repeatedly assaulted, and just, you'd think that the administration was in on it by allowing these things to happen. But in fact, the directive from the top down was to the correction officers was, if you put your hands on an inmate, get ready to defend your own lawsuit when he sues. What they didn't count on was lawsuits from employees, right? So that was going to be the countervailing force. And, I really encourage anyone who is subjected to abuse, just look at all available options because no one deserves that.
And I always say this, nothing is more expensive than your life.
And your mental health.
What I mean by that, yeah, is oftentimes we'll think about, I can't possibly not have a paycheck, let's say for 6 months, because by the way, the job market is also broken. Like the job recruiting and hiring process is very broken. So I don't send anyone out there lightly. We just really need to it's all balancing. But what I do say is I call it a life raft. And the life raft is constructed in a way to allow you to give yourself, let's say 6 months to a year to rest, heal, job search, get your life purpose, think about what you actually want to do. More often than not, I'm running into so many millennials that are like, well, we just fell into corporate because that's where you make money. And that's where, the money and the great benefits are. They're not wrong. That's exactly what I did too. But now we have a chance to say, and by the way, I probably would have lived out my days in the larger workplace had it not been for the way that the abuse that I incurred last year. So I'm grateful in some ways as well, in many ways as well, because it allowed me to take a moment and an intentional pause to say, what do I really want to do? And what I've learned about myself is that I have got to be able to help people and also live a life where I can be my authentic self using my voice. A lot of people that are kind of following me now on LinkedIn, they have no idea who I am, because a year ago, this time, I was a very kind of mind your manners corporate executive woman. Don't be too much, too loud, too opinionated, too anything. Well, I've blown that out of the water. And for the first time in my life, I share what I'm actually feeling and thinking. And that's how I'm trying to find the women that need my help. You can do it. It does not have to be this torturous. And unfortunately, what happens is, what I find is, the moment that someone realizes they might need a coach or a therapist, they're to the point where there is a point of desperation, because they're so harmed and their mental health is so deteriorated that we kind of have to work backwards then forwards, to go for. But regardless, getting the therapist, getting the coach as soon as you can will be the most helpful, but we can't tell you when to do that. You have to do it for yourself.
You are a living example of turning a negative into a positive, right? I'm so glad that you're available to help people. Amy, what is the best way for people to contact you if they're in need of your services?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked. So I'm on LinkedIn, and my unique link is Amy Pons' Magic. My business is called Unlock the Magic, and I have a website. It's unlockthemagic.org. Then also my Instagram, unlockthemagic_. So any of those ways. And then lastly, my email address is amyp@unlockthemagic.org. So lots of different ways. But Linda, I'm so happy that you invited me on today and to talk about this subject. It used to be really hard for me to talk about, and it's not like it's not anymore. I attempted my life a little over a decade ago. It's not lost on me, but I am here to tell you, you can get through that. And I had it happen again, and I finally got what I was supposed to be doing in this life. And that is something I wouldn't trade for the world. So I'm here. I'm ready to be of service. And everyone listening, you matter. You're enough. And Linda and I are here to help.
Yeah, there's always help available. And if you are experiencing suicide, please reach out to someone. there's the National Suicide Hotline at 988. But the worst thing to do is just keep quiet and just feel that you're alone out there, because there's always help. Amy, thank you so much for sharing your words of wisdom. And any last thoughts?
Thank you. And of course, I could talk about this for a long time, it feels like. But to your point, you are not alone. I do want to give a shout out to those who are thinking about suicide. I know exactly where you are mentally, and it feels like you'd be a burden, or you'd be opening up a can of worms, like by telling someone. Just please try to find that one ally that you can run through what you're experiencing, and just try. It's one of the things that really bothers me when someone commits suicide is when like survivors will talk about, oh, that was selfish, or why didn't they just say something? It's not easy, and there's no room for judgment. So for those of you contemplating it, find someone who's not judgmental in your life to run it past, run through your feelings, and you deserve to be here. Okay.
It's one of the reasons why I started this podcast, is to show people who have been at very low moments in their life where they contemplated suicide or attempted suicide, and then with the passage of time have really managed to overcome the depression and to thrive. And there's so many examples of that. So I'm hoping that that inspiration will just spread.
Medicine, therapy, life's amazing. And again, you deserve it. You matter. You deserve to be here. So
thank you so much, Amy.